Like many legacy institutions, the WHO has become mired in bureaucratic bloat, entrenched paradigms, conflicts of interest, and international power politics. WHO's priorities have increasingly reflected the biases and interests of corporate medicine. Too often it has allowed political agendas like pushing harmful gender ideology to hijack its core mission. And too often it has become the tool of politics and turned its back on promoting health and health security.
Strong criticism from Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr. addressing the organization he's criticizing, the WHO. That message was sent to the WHO this week to explain why President Trump chose to withdraw from the organization, and he urged other member countries to follow suit.
It comes as the international body adopted what it calls a pandemic agreement, an accord that says it will establish cooperation between members and access to resources like tests and vaccines should another global pandemic occur. But Secretary Kennedy has a different view of the agreement. Let's take a listen about what he said about that.
The WHO has not even come to terms with its failures during COVID, let alone made significant reforms. Instead, it has doubled down with the pandemic agreement, which will lock in all of the dysfunctions of the WHO pandemic response. The WHO, under pressure from China, suppressed reports at critical junctures of human-to-human transmission and then worked with China to promote the fiction that COVID originated from bats or pangolins rather than from a Chinese government-sponsored research at a biolab in Wuhan.
Kennedy also cited his and the president's discomfort with how much money the U.S. was giving the WHO and how much influence countries like China had in its decision-making. Now, while there was no immediate reaction from the organization or its delegates in the past, the WHO has denied allegations that it is too close to China and denied it mishandled the COVID-19 pandemic. We're probably going to fight about this one. I am happy to have us not involved in the WHO anymore.
Ridiculous.
I think. Why is that ridiculous?
Because the WHO, like viruses, don't respect borders. They don't respect borders at all, as we saw with COVID-19. And so withdrawing from the
WHO doesn't respect borders.
Yeah, but during a global health emergency, if we ever do, there's no coordination. There's lack of communication. And the U.S. interests are now put last if we're not part of a global organization. And so although there's a disagreement about how COVID-19 was handled, not being a part of the larger conversation about what's going on will cause a rise in a bunch of things, like people trying to flee from certain circumstances and more people coming here. It will affect immigration. We have to be on the same accord. We have to be on the same accord with the world to make sure that our response is in line and in unison.
I agree with that. We need to work with other countries and coordinate efforts and sharing of resources. But the reason I despise the WHO and think we should get as far from this organization as possible, we should burn it to the ground, is because they did not foster international cooperation. They covered for the authoritarian regime of China. When COVID happened, that's what they did, is helped China cover it up. They were beholden to China. That's not just my opinion. This is reporting from the New York Times. In the hunt for virus source, the WHO let China take charge. As it praised Beijing, the World Health Organization concealed concessions they were making to China and may have sacrificed the best chance to unravel the virus's origins. They did that. When COVID unfolded, they made excuses for China's government. They said, let's not be anti-China. That would be racist. We can't have that. They helped an authoritarian regime cover up their complicity in an event that killed millions of people globally. They have no credibility to me. We should end the organization and finally start a new organization that will be truly collaborative between different countries. It's not because I don't want to be collaborative. I do. You're right that viruses don't abide by borders. Of course. We should pay attention to what other countries are doing. We should not be bound to follow the policies of a distant international organization that is bought and paid for by communist China.
I think this is about protecting lives and not scoring political points. And so we have to figure out, do you want to cast stones from the outside and just talk about what's going wrong? Or do you want to go inside it? Trump claims to be the man who can make a deal. So why doesn't he have conversations about what he would like to see done within an organization that already exists instead of creating another World Health Organization Part 2, and going through all the work and spending all the money that we don't have to spend to create something new? Why don't we figure out how to reform from within? Of course there's issues. Of course there's things to be looked at of how it can be handled better for the next time. But the only way you do that is by starting and having conversations about that early before we're in the middle of a crisis. And I think that one way to do it is to say, maybe not threaten to take your money out or take your money out completely, but go to the table and say what you want to see change, the same way that we do when we have conversations with politicians that want an office or a space or want our dollars for funding. We tell them what we're looking for. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. With WHO, since we're one of the largest contributors to that organization, I think we have a lot of power in the conversation about what happens next.
I think if the WHO was as beholden to Russia as has been to China, it would be obvious to liberals and Democrats that we should not tie ourselves to it so closely. If it was, to use a favorite Democratic liberal mainstream media phrasing, echoing Russian disinformation, we would not want to be associated with it. That's what they would say. It echoes Chinese disinformation, disinformation on behalf of the Chinese government, which, by the way, is not in the interest of the Chinese people. It's not about blaming the Chinese people or anything of that nature. I wish they were liberated from this evil organization that wants to, destroy the planet, and unleashed, not deliberately, but unleashed a virus on the entire world and concealed their role in doing so. And we could have responded more efficiently. Fewer people would have died if we knew the full story from the beginning. But they wanted to hide their responsibility. I think that just cannot be waved away or overlooked. I think that is a very, very serious issue, and I do not have trust or faith in the WHO. I think that's not just a crazy right-wing or libertarian opinion, but an opinion of, frankly, even of health experts, unless they've been, unless they're counting on research dollars that the WHO coordinates, they have some stake in defending the organization. That's a problem.
A pattern of this administration and people in it like RFK is make a huge decision, figure out how to solve it permanently later. And that is not a real way to protect Americans' interests. I think if RFK would have came forward with a plan, like you said, create an organization. Okay, that's going to take years and a lot of time and a lot of money. Create it now. By the time they're out of office and there's a new president, then we'll have the organization. So what's the plan right now? You're pulling out of the WHO, and then what? So if anything happens, we're just unprotected because it's better than being in bed with this organization that has for years helped us come up with coordinated efforts.
We're unprotected because we're not binding ourselves to some kind of international compact that is going to be unduly influenced by China.
So just no plan. So then no plan.
Well, we have our own plan. We have our own. We have the CDC and the FDA. The European Union has their own health officials. Honestly, there were several points in the pandemic where I actually wished, and I've never said this ever before in my life, where I wished we were following the European rules because the European procedures were less strict than the U.S. ones. Europe did not recommend school closures. They were less strict on mask mandates, vaccine mandates. They had saner rules than the U.S. did, and we still had what we had. So it's not. And also, what do you mean? It's our own internal policies and guidance, and pharmaceuticals invented by American companies with American tax dollars. We're paying for all the research that makes overcoming COVID possible for everyone. So it's not like there's no plan. There is a plan. We're executing the plan. Everyone else is taking advantage of the plan. And at the same time, they want to say we have to kiss China's feet? No. I say no. No way.
We'll keep talking about this.
Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson calling Trump a monster after the DOJ launched an investigation into the mayor's hiring practices. We'll get into that, more Rising, right after this.